Hello and welcome to the first of my Baldur's Gate tactical videos, a new series that I hope to gradually add to over the coming weeks and months, in addition to a new blind Let's Play of Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition, the Black Pits 1 and 2. With only one full saga playthrough under my belt, I have no illusions of being an expert or veteran of Baldur's Gate. But I do consider myself a fairly accomplished player with a reasonable grasp of the core mechanics of the game and a decent knowledge of the character classes, NPC companions, and enemies that you will come across in the game. Furthermore, as somebody who was a total newbie until fairly recently, I feel better placed than most in understanding the difficulties the new player to the franchise might encounter when playing Baldur's Gate for the very first time. The Baldur's Gate saga is by far the most epic and rewarding gaming experience I have come across thus far, but the very complexity and depth that provides such lasting appeal and endless replayability also means that it can be immensely challenging and overwhelming for a brand new player, especially those who, like me perhaps, have no experience of playing tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, or the other Infinity Engine games like Planescape Torment or Icewind Dale. Thus, the aim of this series is to provide a resource for beginners to answer some of the basic questions in the game without the risk of getting spoiled by an online walkthrough or internet forum. So, in this, the first video of the series, I will offer a brief overview of the very basics of playing Baldur's Gate, and attempt to highlight some of the most common issues that trip up and confuse new players. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in the Fortress Library of Candlekeep, at the very beginning of the epic saga that is Baldur's Gate. Of course, if you started with a normal single-player game, you will begin in Candlekeep with only one character. I've created a custom party of 6 here for the purposes of this tutorial, and so that I'd have a range of characters with which to demonstrate some of the basic game mechanics. So basically, not to worry if your protagonist is feeling a bit lonely in Candlekeep. Once his or her adventure begins, you'll run into plenty of NPC companions with which to fill the ranks. So, onto the tutorial itself. I am not going to go through all of the buttons on the user interface. I think most of them are fairly self-explanatory, but I will draw your attention first to this button here, Help, which is actually a really nice new feature of the Enhanced Edition, which, as you can see, tells you exactly what each of the buttons on the user interface does. And what's particularly nice about it is you can actually click on different members of the party by clicking on their portraits, and it would explain the specific user interface buttons related to their specific character abilities. So, obviously, because for instance, the party thief has a different set of skills to the party mage. So I think that's a really nice new feature that they've included. The next thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the options button, and here for gameplay options. Again, most of these are fairly basic, but I'd like to draw your attention to the auto pause options. So, somebody unfamiliar with the Infinity Engine games might mistake Baldur's Gate for a real-time game. It is in fact real-time plus pause, which means it almost functions like a turn-based game in terms of the tactical complexity and depth, and the care that you're expected to use when dealing with particularly the more challenging encounters in a game. So, for a beginner, certainly I strongly recommend that you have most of these options selected. The only situations where I don't have, this is actually my own default settings. The only times where I don't have all of these selected is if I'm playing multiplayer games and I'm only using one character, and I don't want to auto pause so much that it disrupts everybody else. So that's the quick word on. Actually, whilst we're on the topic of pausing, and also you may have mentioned this option here. So auto pause at end of round. So this is the terminology of time in the game. Obviously, there's hours and days, which you'll be familiar with, but in terms of shorter durations, it's split into rounds and turns. So one round is 6 real-time seconds, and that of course means 6 unpaused real-time seconds, and 10 rounds makes one turn. So that gives you an idea of, so understanding that will give you an idea of how long it takes to cast certain spells and how long their durations last. And I think that's what there is to say regarding auto pause and most of the user interface buttons. Next thing I want to mention is party formation. So you can select the whole party by clicking on the button at the bottom right, or just dragging.
Yes.
And you'll notice that there's a couple of formations you can choose. The silvery highlighted dot represents the position of the party leader within that formation. So the party leader is the individual whose portrait is at the top of the group. So for us that means it's Lily Black, and because she's a fairly squishy mage, let's give her a safer formation where she's nicely in the middle of everybody else. Oh, incidentally, I've just paused and unpaused using the space bar. That's the manual way to pause, in addition to the auto pauses that you can select. So yeah, and also actually, if you use the right click and hold, you can change the direction with which the formation is facing. So this is going to be a bit more, this is a bit easier to see if I use the diamond formation, or the triangle formation, I guess. And you'll see everyone moving to their allocated positions. You can of course move, interchange party members' positions within formations by dragging their portraits and reassigning them like so, so that next time they move they'll take up new positions. And of course you can change the party leader again, simply just by dragging somebody's portrait at the top. But I like to have Lily as the party leader because of...
I deserve to be leader.
That line. Okay. I think that's all I wanted to say about party formations. Next, let's look at the character records. Okay, so this is Lily's character record, and it may look a little bit overwhelming at first, but thankfully most of it is fairly intuitive. And I'm also not going to go over all of the ability stats in detail. I might do so if I were to make a character creation video. But I will provide a link in the details below to a website called Playithardcore, which is a spoiler-free website that is quite excellent and provides the maths behind the ability stats in Baldur's Gate. I will, however, mention that it's worth mentioning that that website is very much designed from a power gamer's perspective, and if you compare the stats that they recommend compared to what I've got for Lily and other members of the party, then you'll see that, in my opinion, you certainly don't need min-maxed stats in order to beat the game, and I find sort of more mortal characters more interesting anyway. But anyway, that's just my own, and of course I should mention that of course Lily Black was the protagonist of the excellent Let's Play series by Tord on the YouTube channel My Name Is Not Lily, which certainly proves that somebody with fairly mediocre stats like this can complete a full saga playthrough, even playing blind, and with a fair amount of roleplay restrictions. So certainly don't worry too much about making perfect stats. But that website still is useful for understanding the maths behind it if you were interested. But I guess quickly I should mention that there's a few things about the stats that are not quite intuitive, and one of them is strength. So in addition to obviously allowing you to carry more stuff, strength also improves your chances of hitting an enemy in melee, which isn't the most obvious thing I would think of. In addition, it also a lot of weapons and armor have minimum strength requirements, so it doesn't matter if you are a warrior, or rather, it doesn't matter if you're an archer trained to shoot very accurately. You won't be able to use, for instance, a composite longbow unless you have 18 strength, which is quite a harsh requirement in my opinion. And most forms of heavy armor, like plate mail, also requires fairly high strength to use, even if your character class allows it. And for dexterity, again, slightly counterintuitive in my opinion, dexterity does not influence how accurately you strike somebody in melee. It does obviously influence how accurately you can shoot, and it also contributes to your armor class. So the better your dexterity, the less likely you get hit. So dexterity is something a very useful stat to have. And everything else I think is reasonably intuitive. As I said, the details you can find in the link below. Two things I like to highlight, however, are armor class and tackle. Now, armor class is essentially a combination of how heavy your armor is and how easily you dodge incoming attacks. And without going into the maths behind it, the lower the better. And the same goes for tackle stands for 2-hit armor class 0. Again, without going to the maths, basically the lower the better. Hit points, fairly intuitive. I mentioned that choosing your party leader has an effect on certain situations in the game. So this is it. Characters, the party has a reaction score based on the charisma and reputation of the party leader, or rather, the party reputation is shared between all members of the party. But whenever you encounter an event that tests the party reaction, that uses the charisma of the party leader or whoever is doing the talking at the time. And this has a number of effects. On a couple of minor quests, you may get different outcomes depending on your NPC reaction, and also more commonly, merchant prices are dependent on your reaction score. So it's usually a good idea to have the individual with the highest charisma to do the talking when doing your shopping. And there isn't really a whole lot more to say about other stuff. Weapon proficiencies, more of an issue for warriors. And everything else, mostly just stuff like this, you don't really need to worry about because they will improve automatically as you level up. And intelligence has determines your chances of learning a spell, which is actually, I guess, the magic system is what we're going to look at next. Now, the magic system of Baldur's Gate is, in my opinion, both the most daunting and the most rewarding aspect of the entire game, as there are literally hundreds of spells for you to choose from that allow you to do almost anything, from summoning all sorts of monsters to healing the wounded, to turning an enemy into a squirrel, or even stopping time itself, which is absolutely awesome. There are 4 primary spellcasting classes. These are the mage, the sorcerer, the druid, and the cleric. Of course, there's a few other classes that have a degree of spellcasting ability, but it is these 4 for whom magic is their primary strength. And we'll begin by looking at the druid and the cleric, which are both divine spellcasters, which means that they draw their power from the gods and deities of their Dungeons & Dragons universe, and cast spells from the priest spell pool. Now, the only priest, or the only divine caster I have in this party, is this individual here, who I've named the Dragon Maiden. Now, she is technically an illegal character class combination, as she is a multi-class of Kensai and Druid, and she's been very helpfully modded for me by a friend of mine from the Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition forums, for the purposes, in fact, of my Black Pit blind Let's Play, which incidentally will feature this exact party. So if you're interested in seeing how a Kenzai Druid fares, then be sure to check that out. Now, all divine casters have wisdom as their primary attribute, which determines how many spells they can memorize per day. And you notice that at 12, her wisdom is pretty low, given that it's supposed to be her primary attribute, and explains why she is currently only able to memorize one spell per day. Now that will increase steadily as she levels up, but it does mean that she will have a much smaller, I guess, pool of spells to choose from, compared to another druid or cleric who has, say, 18 wisdom, for example. However, you may have also noticed that despite having 0 experience at the moment, she already has a fair number of known spells, certainly compared to, for example, Lily and her mage spells. So why is this? Well, it's because all divine casters learn spells automatically as they level up. Druids and clerics have a slightly different selection of spells, but they will each learn their respective pools of possible spells automatically as they level up, irrespective of their wisdom. Wisdom merely determines how many spells they can cast per day. In order to cast a spell, like a mage, priests have to have it prepared beforehand. So as you can see, the Dragon Maiden has one spell, Entangle, memorized and ready to use. Once this spell is cast, then she will have to select a new one, and then rest before she can cast a spell again. And she cannot learn any spells from arcane scrolls. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about the mage. Mages, along with sorcerers, are the primary spell arcane casters of Baldur's Gate, which of course means that they cast spells from the arcane or mage spell pool. However, there are some significant differences between how they function. So we'll start here with Lily, the party mage. Now, mages have intelligence as their primary attribute. However, unlike wisdom for a priest, intelligence does not determine how many spells she can memorize per day. Instead, intelligence determines how many spells she can potentially learn or scribe into her spellbook per spell level. And you can check out the links to Playithardcore for the full intelligence table, but I know that with an intelligence of 17, Lily is able to memorize, or sorry, learn 14 spells per spell level. And as you can see, there are in total 9 arcane spell levels. Intelligence also determines the chances of Lily successfully learning or scribing a spell. And as you can see, with an intelligence of 17, that chance is 75%. So how does a mage learn or scribe a scroll? The answer is, of course, from arcane scrolls. And as you can see, Lily has a couple of these in her backpack. If you right-click on an arcane scroll, and believe it or not, it took me 15 in-game days before I noticed this. If you right-click on a scroll, you'll see the option to write magic. This represents Lily's attempt to copy or scribe the scroll, consuming it in the process into her own spellbook, so that she can use it at will in the future, assuming she has it memorized and prepared, of course. So let's do that now and see how it works. Okay, so she successfully scribed invisibility. Let's try and do the same with shield here. Okay, so she's on a good roll. Now you'll see that she has shield added to her level 1 known spells, and also invisibility, even though she currently does not have the ability to memorize and use it. Since we're on the subject of scrolls, it's a good time to mention the other scrolls found in the game. This here, Raised Dead, is a priest scroll, which, as you might imagine, can only be used by priests. which of course means druids or clerics. However, unlike a mage, priests are unable to scribe their own scrolls. So, but they can be used as a single charge item. The other kind of scrolls you'll find are these protection scrolls, which all have a green design, and they need to be identified before they can be used, which is just as well that we have here an identify scroll, which also demonstrates the fact that arcane scrolls can be used as a single charge item, as well as used to scribe into the spellbook. So here we go, let's identify this protection scroll, and you see that it is a very useful and powerful protection from magic scroll. These scrolls, which as you can see all have a green design, can be used by any character class, even this cavalier, a pure warrior here, who I think only has like 10 intelligence or something. Yeah, there we go. So those protection scrolls can be used by any character class, and they're extremely powerful and fairly rare and valuable. And they cannot be scribed by either priests or arcane casters. Oh, and incidentally, this is a Wand of Fire, which has one charge left, and again, it's just simply a charged item that arcane casters can use. I think that is all I've got to say at the moment regarding mages. So let's move on to sorcerers. Sorcerers are also powerful spellcasters that have access to pretty much the same range of arcane spells as mages. They're also able to cast spells from scrolls and wands, much like a mage. So, how do they differ to a mage then? Well, for starters, sorcerers do not have a primary attribute. I think in the original tabletop game, sorcerers are supposed to use charisma as their primary attribute. However, this was not implemented for Baldur's Gate. As a result, sorcerers really have very little requirements in terms of their ability stats. And the 18 intelligence that I've given to this character is entirely for character roleplay purposes, and it doesn't really do him any good. In fact, from a power gaming perspective, it would be much better to have boosted his dexterity to 18 for the improved armor class. In addition, sorcerers are unable to scribe scrolls into their spellbook because they don't have a spellbook. So how do sorcerers learn these spells? The answer is much like a druid or cleric. They will learn spells automatically as they level up. But unlike a druid or cleric, they will not be able to learn all of the spells, all of the arcane spells automatically as they level up. But instead, they must choose, upon each level up, they must choose a spell or more from a pool of spells of the appropriate spell level. The other consequence of not having a spell book is that sorcerers are obviously unable to pick spells from the spell book to memorize to use the next day. So, in that case, how do they choose spells? Well, sorcerers' spells are divided into spell levels, and for each spell level, they will have a certain number of spells that they can cast. So this level 1 sorcerer obviously has only access to level 1 spells, and he knows 2, Sleep and Magic Missile. Now the 3 there doesn't mean he can cast 3 Magic Missiles and 3 Sleep spells. It just means he has the ability to cast 3 level 1 spells in total, and it could be either magic, it could be any combination of Magic Missiles or Sleep. And I think that covers the primary differences between a sorcerer and a mage. Oh, of course, I should mention sorcerers also have a slightly slower spell progression, and of course, as you might imagine, having access to spells like this means that he is, to an extent, a greater flexibility in battle because he doesn't need to pick particular spells to cast from the day before. Instead, he is able to pick and choose from his available spells to suit the current circumstances or situation. On the other hand, sorcerers have less strategic like options compared to a mage, because obviously, unlike a mage, he's not able to scribe a very wide variety of spells into his spellbook. Yeah, so that's the I guess the tactical differences that arise from their mechanical differences. Back to some of the issues with arcane casters that often confuse new players in general. Um, One notable difference between arcane magic and divine magic is that uh, whereas divine spellcasters are able to wear armor and cast spells unhindered, although druids usually have fairly strict armor restrictions, um, mage spells are completely shut down by any type of armor, except robes, of course, which is obviously designed for mages anyway. Um, oh, and the exception of elven chainmail. Apart from these two types of armor, any other armor, even the lightest leather armor, will completely shut down a mage's all sorts of spellcasting. Um, this isn't so much of an issue for a pure spellcaster like Khan and Lily that we have, but it is an issue to bear in mind if you're using a fighter mage or some other hybrid class of that type. Because obviously, if you're wearing armor to fight more effectively in combat, you're not going to use your spells, and if you're using your spells, then you're not going to use your grey armor. Um, this becomes less of an issue at higher levels where you can use magic to pretty much um, replace to mitigate the lack of physical armor, but it is an issue to bear in mind at lower levels. Another issue that often causes beginners a problem is the level 1 spell, Find Familiar. Um, it is really useful for a low level spellcaster to summon a familiar for the extra hit point bonus. However, what a lot of people miss is that if your familiar dies for any reason, the arcane caster who summoned him or her would suffer a constitution penalty of -1 permanently. So familiars must be used with great care, because obviously, unlike many other games of this type, in Dungeons and Dragons rule set, the starting ability stats that your character has doesn't really increase very much at all. So a permanent loss of 1 point of constitution would be pretty serious. And I've seen situations where people don't notice what's happening and end up losing quite a lot of constitution points before they realize that it was caused by their familiar dying. So that's something to highlight. And on the related issue of armor and character abilities, um, thieves are able to use their thief skills whilst wearing whilst wearing leather armor. But anything heavier than that, they will be unable to use any thief skills or use stealth. Um, and the same goes for rangers, although I don't think rangers have any thief skills anyway, but certainly they will no longer be able to use their stealth abilities if they're wearing armor heavier than, I think the heaviest you can use is studded leather. And I think that covers most of what I wanted to go through with the first video. I've certainly done plenty of talking, so I'll end with a quick demonstration of some of the points I've mentioned, and maybe a couple more minor details that a beginner might not have noticed.